I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime, and this is Currents.
Parents, be on the lookout. Trouble may be at the other end of your children's cell phone.
We'll find out why one pope's path to sainthood may have some bumps ahead.
The criticism is based on a sense that Pius XII did not articulate loudly and clearly a condemnation of the Nazi regime during the Second World War.
And a celebration of a historic journey.
Every parish, I think, in our Diocese of Brooklyn is so culturally rich, of so many diverse cultures. You can't say it's all like this or all like that. It's like one big soup.
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Cell phones, more and more children have them, but what exactly is it that they're calling up? Sometimes it may be just their friends, but sometimes maybe not.
Right, most phones have internet access, and that gets children connected to all that the internet has to offer, the good and the bad, and that includes pornography. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is part of a new campaign to make children aware of this danger. Cardinal William Keeler, the Archbishop Emeritus of Baltimore, is one of the co-chairs of the Religious Alliance Against Pornography.
The Alliance's board is made up of people from all different faith communities, and I recently had the chance to speak on the phone with one of the board members. His name is Rick Schatz, and he's the president and CEO of the National Coalition for the Protection of Children and Families. Well, Rick, thanks so much for being with us on Currents today.
Glad to be with you, Francesca.
Well, we're talking about pornography and cell phones, especially as it relates to kids and teenagers, and you're involved in a campaign to help combat some of this. How did your campaign even come about?
Well, it just became very, very evident in the last couple of years that the issue of pornography not just being distributed through the internet on computers was becoming more and more of a problem. And as cell phones have become pocket computers, they now have access to the internet, which means they have access to all the pornography on the internet, and our kids and grandkids are the experts in this technology.
Right. They're always sort of leapfrogging ahead of us. So
they they are.
And so the parental controls that you might set at home on your computer are sort of null and void at a certain level because they can just carry around in their pocket all this technology that can access things. So tell us, how did the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops get involved in trying to combat this proliferation of pornography on the cell phones?
Well, the Catholic Church has been deeply involved with the National Coalition for the Protection of Children and Families ever since 1986, when we formed the Religious Alliance Against Pornography. Cardinal Bernardine was co-chair of RAP, as we call it, when it started, until he passed away. Cardinal Keeler of Baltimore has been vice chair of RAP ever since then. So we've had a deep and ongoing relationship with the highest level representatives of the Catholic Church in combating pornography.
Sure. Well, they've obviously been involved in advocates to try to keep kids safe, at home and on their cell phones. In this case, sexting is sort of a term that has popped up of late, for better or for worse, to sort of imply kids sending each other naked pictures or, of each other. And we've seen in cases all around the country where kids have gotten into trouble for it. It's been exposed. How easy is it for kids to access pornography on cell phones, pre-produced and also just through each other?
Yeah. Well, it's very, very easy. Very soon, Francesca, it will be virtually impossible to buy a cell phone anywhere in the United States that is not internet capable. And so kids are going to have internet access through cell phones, and so they have access to all the pornography on the internet, and then they're producing their own.
Right.
What it amounts to is child pornography by taking nude or semi-nude pictures of themselves, transmitting them to their friends, neighbors, boyfriends, girlfriends, using a cell phone.
Right.
Sexting is a huge problem. The latest estimates are that about 20% of the teenagers in the United States have actually sent such a picture over the internet using a cell phone.
Sure, and we're talking about minors here a lot of the time. I mean, you can be over 16 or over 18, but it can certainly affect a lot of kids. So what should parents be looking out for? What can they do?
Well, the primary message that we give to parents is a couple things. Number one, they need to be engaged in the lives of their kids. They need to understand enough about these kinds of technologies to understand how their kids are using the technology. The second thing is they must be talking to their kids about sexuality, about purity, about righteousness. They must help their children develop what we call an inner moral compass, because our kids and grandkids are going to be exposed to some of these materials, and parents have to help them make the right decisions in terms of righteousness and following God on these issues.
Well, this sort of goes back to old school teachings and things that you would want parents to be telling their kids anyway, and now this new technology sort of takes off and has a life of its own in many respects. Is there any way of technologically putting a kibosh on this? Or, like you said, you know, pretty soon all phones are going to have internet access, so there's really nothing that we can do?
Well, there are some very important things that we can do, and that's the good news, Francesca. For the last 3 or 4 years, the National Coalition and RAP have been working with all 5 of the major wireless companies in the United States. Those companies control over 95% of the cell phones in the United States. We have urged all of those companies to develop what we call parental controls, and they've done that. And they're developing more and more parental controls all the time that help give parents access to technical solutions to this problem.
Okay.
I mean, I've actually got a phone call this afternoon with an executive from Sprint Nextel. We've talked to AT&T, T-Mobile,
Sure.
Verizon, all these companies, and they're all developing parental controls that are very, very helpful.
All right. Well, Rick, thanks so much for being on Currents today. This is about all the time that we have, but this is a very important issue, and it just sounds like at the very root level, anyway, the more conversation about these things that a parent can have with their children, the better.
Well, it is true, and the other thing, Francesca, I'd close with this. We have developed a booklet called Sex and Cell Phones, Parental Talking to Their Kids, Parents Talking to Their Kids, that can be made available on our website, which is www.nationalcoalition.org. It's a booklet called Sex and Cell Phones, very important information for parents to learn about this issue in that booklet.
All right, Rick. Well, we will pass that information along to all of our viewers, and we very much appreciate your time here on Currents today.
Francesca, thanks for having me on anytime, and blessings to you and yours.
Likewise. And I have posted a little more about that on our website.
Well, it's a danger. Danger lurks everywhere, I guess, now. And, you know, with the technology, as we said, comes the good and comes the bad.
The thing is, I think it's very difficult to know not only what are they accessing through the internet, but also what they're sort of sending each other.
Right.
And that is very troubling as well. So it's not just so much that they might go out there and try to find something on their cell phones, but it's also what's automatically being sent to them, even through people their own age.
Right, through people their own age, through their friends, through their peers, and as has been in the news here recently with the whole Tiger Woods thing. The sexting, the sending text messages of a sexual nature back and forth is also very prevalent among, you know, age groups that get younger and younger.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, sort of those preteens and young teens. So I think that this organization is really sort of trying to tackle this head on from the issue of trying to give parents some of the tools and some of the tips that they might want to think about when they're considering giving their child a cell phone, or if they're also, you know, they already have done so, but they want to know, okay, maybe I should really step in and better manage this a little bit, because there's a lot of good information out there on how to help that.
Okay, well, very good. Don't go anywhere, though. There's much more Currents coming up straight ahead. Easy for me to say. When we return, we'll have all the day's headlines,
including a farewell mass for the Vice President's mother. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Coming up later, the City of Immigrants celebrates the most famous immigrants in the world.
But first, let's check the day's headlines. Funeral services were held today in Delaware for Vice President Joe Biden's mother. The service was held at the Immaculate Heart of Mary Catholic Church in Wilmington. Vice President Biden delivered a eulogy at the service. President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle were among a host of dignitaries in attendance. Jean Finnegan Biden passed away Friday after a recent illness. She was 92 years old. A top political strategist for John McCain's failed 2008 presidential bid says Sarah Palin believed it was divine will that led her to be chosen as the Republicans' running mate. In an interview with 60 Minutes on CBS, Steve Schmidt says McCain had planned to choose Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman as his running mate. Schmidt says that that changed when word of the plan got out and the campaign received political blowback. That's when McCain chose Palin, and Schmidt says the former Alaska governor called the choice God's plan. Well, as it looks like Congress is getting closer to final passage of health care reform legislation, the U.S. Bishops' Conference is launching yet another campaign against abortion funding in the bill. The bishops have sent bulletin inserts and flyers to 19,000 parishes across the country. The Bishops' Conference says on its website that, quote, healthcare reform should not advance a pro-abortion agenda in our country. Bishops are encouraging Catholics to call their representatives and senators to tell them to oppose the final bill.
A new U.S. envoy to North Korea says that country's human rights situation is one of the worst in the world. Robert King, who took office a few weeks ago, called the situation in the communist nation appalling. King is in South Korea on a fact-finding mission. He'll meet with North Korean defectors in Seoul next week. The North Korean government recently has expressed a desire for better relations with Washington, but King says for that to happen, North Korea must have a greater respect for human life. Well, the man who shot and wounded Pope John Paul in 1981 says he will consider book and movie offers after he's released from prison. Mehmet Ali Ajay is scheduled to be released January the 18th after serving a 19-year sentence for his attack on the Pope, followed by 10 years in the killing of a Turkish journalist. He told the Associated Press that in addition to those movies or books, he would like to travel to the Vatican to meet with Pope Benedict. Pope John Paul II met Ajay in 1983 and forgave him for the shooting. Well, if you pick up a copy of the diocesan newspaper, The Tablet, every week at your parish, you're probably pretty familiar with the paper's look and its layout. You might have also noticed that the paper's website didn't quite match up with the print edition. Well, all of that changed yesterday with the launch of the new Tablet website. We spoke with editor Ed Wilkinson about it today.
All of the new contemporary look that we put into the paper, we wanted that to be incorporated into the website. So we think it's a cleaner look, it's a more contemporary look, and we think it's going to be really serve us very, very well. On our homepage, we have a photo album. So every week we're going to have 5 pictures from the week that's going to be right there. You open up to the site, and there they are like an album folding one by one, and you can see what's basically in the paper and on the site for that week. And one of the beautiful things about the website is you can put a lot more photos up than you would be able to put onto a page in print. There's a place to respond to us, and we're also going to have a poll. Each week there's going to be a different poll so that we can test the pulse of our audience. I love it. It's 2 different types of media, and I think if we use them both to their advantages, it's going to serve us in the long run.
Well, stay tuned. There's much more currents coming up. Just ahead, we'll look at the controversy surrounding a former pope and his cause for sainthood.
Pius XII always poses in the minds of many Jewish people a question. The question being, did he do enough? Didn't he do enough? Should he have spoken out?
Welcome back. Well, he's been condemned as a Nazi sympathizer and praised as a hero who helped save countless Jews. Now the debate about Pope Pius XII is heating up. Last month, the Vatican elevated him to venerable, which is the next step to sainthood.
Well, to get a clearer picture of a pope who's been criticized but could one day be canonized, I sat down yesterday with a man who's been very closely involved with Catholic and Jewish dialogue. He's Monsignor Guy Massey, the Vicar for Ecumenical Affairs. Monsignor Guy Massey, thank you so much for joining us here once again. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
First of all, sir, what are your thoughts on the Vatican declaring Pope Pius XII venerable?
Well, I was not surprised about the Vatican stating that. Pius XII had a great deal to do with the ongoing development of scripture study that we now have. We also know that he did lay a great deal of the foundation for Vatican II. The controversy that it raised in my mind is what the effect of the world would be to this announcement.
So what is the argument being made by those who are critical of Pius XII?
The criticism is coming from largely the Jewish communities throughout the world, and the criticism is based on a sense that Pius XII did not articulate loudly and clearly a condemnation of the Nazi regime during the Second World War. And it started perhaps during the time of a play called The Deputy. Previously to that, there wasn't that much criticism at all. As a matter of fact, the newspapers praised Pius for his help of the Jewish communities in Rome.
Now, as far as you in your daily ministry, have you spoken with many people who have been critical of Pius XII?
All the time. In my Catholic-Jewish relations, yes, Pius XII always poses in the minds of many Jewish people a question. The question being, did he do enough? Didn't he do enough? Should he have spoken out? And the answer to that question is what we need to discover as now we go through this recognition of his virtues. I would think that in order to address this issue, perhaps the announcement of making him venerable is a perfect opportunity now to open up the Vatican archives, have those archives on that pontificate studied academically honestly and historically honestly, meaning that I would like to see scholars go in without a hypothesis, not an hypothesis of defending Pius or a hypothesis of condemning Pius, but for the historian to go in there to say, this is what is here. And historians have to give meaning and connection from what connected A to B to C. Now, of course, I think you need a number of voices, because I don't know whether or not, I think we all filter things through who we are. And so, since there is that filtering mechanism, I think you need a number of scholars, a number of interpretations of his pontificate to give a fairly good evaluation of Pius's pontificate in that area.
Now, coming up in just a few days, the Pope is going to be visiting a synagogue in Rome. What's your view on that in light of all this controversy surrounding Pius XII?
In light of the controversy surrounding Pius XII, I think it's very important that Benedict does go to the synagogue in Rome to keep this dialogue ongoing and to assure that community that even though there is a controversy on this in the Jewish community, that we have an ongoing dialogue about this particular issue. Perhaps another issue to look at when we're looking at Pius XII is what is deemed as silent, although he did address the Nazis in 1942 in his Christmas address, and it was picked up in the German newspapers as that, and as condemning some of the things that they were doing. I think one has got to realize that not everything is in writing. In a very oppressive regime, perhaps there are few things in writing, and those interviews now of oral history is extremely important. And one also has to see that in Rome itself, many churches were open. Santa Maria Sopra Minerva was a very big place where Jews were housed at this time. So one would have to say that Pius knew very well what was going on in the city of Rome and throughout Europe on the housing of Jews. Should he have spoken out? Well, the Dutch bishop spoke out, and all of the work that they had striven to do in helping the Jews and hiding the Jews were invaded. So it's a very tricky thing to judge Pius XII by today's standards and not living under an oppressive regime. I mean, I as an American have never lived under an oppressive regime. How do you react? And how do you offer resistance? Is the only resistance to speak out clearly and directly, or is there are there other ways to be resistant to such oppression?
Monsignor Guy Massey, thank you so much for your time today, sir. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Monsignor Guy Massey there. And you know, he has a good point when he says that just because not a lot was done publicly as far as trying to stop the Holocaust and trying to help Jews during that period of time, doesn't mean that things weren't done in private. And maybe a lot of things had to be done in private. And that's what the Monsignor said, was that, you know, you really kind of, there needs to be this investigation done as to exactly what happened during that time period, and an independent investigation where you're not going in trying to prove a particular point and looking for things to back the point of view that you already, or the hypothesis that you already bring to the situation.
Yeah, there are a lot of, I think, stories like that of individuals that helped people that, come out maybe later. Just, I think today I was reading that the person who had helped preserve Anne Frank's diary had just passed away at a very, late age. And the reminders that there are many, many stories out there, and that obviously he's being, perhaps considered to very much be a saint, and for many people, hopefully this debate will encourage a dialogue about that time period more than anything.
Yeah, and it's something that definitely needs to be talked about, and it will continue to be talked about, I'm sure, for quite some time here.
Well, stay with us. There's much more current straight ahead.
Coming up, taking the long way home, we'll trace a trip through Egypt.
After the birth of Jesus, who is God, he came to Africa to be safe.
Well, finally tonight, some in this city of immigrants took time recently to pay attention to some immigrants who are often overlooked, but they just may be the most famous migrants in the world.
They are the Holy Family. That's right. And at St. Fortunata Parish in Brooklyn, the Igbo African Catholic community celebrated the flight of the Holy Family into Egypt and paused to consider the meaning that event has for us today.
There are many things for which we remember our Lord, but we never remember what Matthew wrote in his gospel, that after the birth of Jesus, who is God, he came to Africa to be safe. That is important in the life of our Lord. This is an event in our life that nobody seems to remember, but we thought that the Lord coming to Egypt was coming to the Gentile world. He was, as it were, the first immigrant. And having that experience as an immigrant in this country and comparing it to his, he is exemplary for us.
The Nigerians make up for an important group in the diocese and throughout the world. And this comes in the wake of this big assembly of 200 bishops in Rome in October. And our Holy Father told them that Africa is like the lungs of the church because of the tremendous amount of conversions.
We are faith community. We believe so much in God, and we worship God. That's why in Nigeria, in the eastern part of Nigeria, almost 95% are Christians, and greater percentage of these are Catholics. So we live our faith, and we believe in God, and every time we have opportunity, we worship God.
There are about 30,000 not Nigerians, but African priests in Africa and throughout the world, because a good number of African priests are now helping in Europe and also in the United States. So it's important to come together and celebrate the gifts of Africa to the world.
Back home in Nigeria, we celebrate the Eucharist with joy and peace. Bringing in our culture, we enculturate the religion to make it richer, to make it more participatory for the people, so that it will be more enjoyable and more enriching for everybody to understand.
We are going to receive the infant Jesus, and people will shower him maybe with their gifts, their money, gifts. People will come forward and express their joy, and this is, as it were, an upliftment of their faith.
Welcoming the child in a family is a big occasion, it's a joyous occasion. So welcoming the infant Jesus who is born, who was sent to Egypt, is a joyous occasion for Nigerians, especially the Igbos.
You know, every parish, I think, in our Diocese of Brooklyn is so culturally rich, of so many diverse cultures. You can't say it's all like this or all like that. It's like one big soup. The more vegetables, the more meat, the more ingredients you put in it, the richer and the better tasting it is. And it just shows that the church is exactly that, the family of God, and we're all brothers and sisters in Christ.
That's great. Just such a wonderful celebration there.
Very colorful, and you know, obviously the migration into Egypt, and we have such a strong African community here in Brooklyn, the city of immigrants, as we've said. So it's really nice to see how each culture celebrates their culture and their individuality, also, you know, with their faith.
Right, and as you said, the city of immigrants, and not just immigrants from Africa, but from all over the world. Congress is really talking about immigration reform now, and that's sort of, I guess, once healthcare kind of gets wrapped up, that might be the next thing on the agenda for Congress. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has been really focusing on immigration reform coming up here in the next few weeks as well. And actually, it's an issue that we'll be talking about here on Currents later on this week. On the cutting edge. We're riding the wave, you know, so to speak. But Monsignor Marino with the Migration Office here in the diocese is going to join me for a little interview. I'll sit down with him coming up on Thursday. So we'll talk about immigration and the issues surrounding it.
Very good. Informative. And that is it for this edition of Currents. Coming up tomorrow, Jesus through a magnifying glass, a last chance to get a glimpse at a remarkable treatment of the life of Christ.
In the meantime, though, remember, you don't need a TV to catch us here on Currents. You can always reel us in online. We're at currentsny.net. Until next time, thank you so much for watching. I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Have a great night.